So this aspect of Saints and Sages is really just dedicated to history. A lot of this is me vlogging my experience working on my master's in history, and a lot of this I would like to just share my experience, share some of my ideas about history, and really explore the major questions of what is history, why do we do it, and how do we do it. So I hope this is useful, that some people can learn something about history, see a different perspective on the past, as well as understand some of the methods that people are using in history, and maybe even use me as a tutor to some extent. If you have questions about the past, I am a learner. I don't know everything, and I would like to. So if you ask me questions, I will give my best shot at answering them, as well as exploring certain topics and try to grasp what was really going on in the past and how we can better understand where we came from. Let's pick up where I left off. The Communist Manifesto, all right? Karl Marx, Friedrich Engels. There are certain things that are really important to know what came out of Karl Marx and his thinking about history, and it has really shaped the past. I am currently taking a class that is covering methods of history, and we look at all these different other types and frameworks for doing history, and try to just understand how people have done it. The majority of the work that I've read so far in that class is Marxist history. He's been extremely impactful, particularly in the world of academics, and he's somebody that you got to know. Whether you want to know him to argue against him or argue for him, or even say, well, he was semi-right and we need to kind of overturn some of the ideas that he had. But nonetheless, one of the primary things, so I recently read a book that talked about two major aspects of Karl Marx. I'm not going to show you the book. In fact, I'm just going to grab it real quick and read that part. Marxism consists of two major strands, right? Listen to this. Number one, adheres to Marx's vision of the future, the revolution of the proletariat, and the formation of a new Marxist state. I mean, really, it's communist state. But that is really wrapping up that idea where Marxist believes that there's this dynamic between the bourgeois and the proletariat, really the middle class and the working class, and it's ultimately going to escalate into a revolution, really a violent revolution. And that's really what the Communist Manifesto is about. It's calling for people to take up arms against the capitalists. And it's all going to eventually end up as communism. And he kind of sees this as almost, this is how history is going to play out. It's inevitable. All right, so the second thing is an analysis of history based on Marxist economy materialism. History seen as a progression from one economic system, one mode of production to the next, with a society and culture determined by the details of economic structure. Blah. All right, what he's really saying here is, actually it might be she. Yeah, she's saying here, is that Marx's understanding of how these structures play out is pretty much going to be influenced by the socioeconomics. So there's your word there, because whether you're working on your undergrad or whether you're just taking a history class, socioeconomics is pretty much the whole framework in which Marx is articulating history. He sees that it's been economics, it's been wealth, that's been materialism, that's been the driving force in shaping humanity, and thus their social life. And that is really what leads into classism and all that stuff. So he sees that, everything boils down to the socioeconomic. There's one category, that's it. That's it. This person lays out those two things. And I think that there's one more fundamental idea that is throughout Marxist thinking that is really important for everybody to understand whenever we're talking about Karl Marx, whenever we're talking about Marxism. And that is found in the first article of the Communist Manifesto, which says, let's see if we can get that in focused. Come on, focus right there. All right, if you guys can read that. There we go. The history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggle. Now, this is fundamentally important to understanding Marxism, because he pretty much paints this dynamic in which history is all about this class struggle. And he really articulates it in this idea of master-slave, factory owner and worker, kings and peasants, and these kind of this conflict between these two classes of people. And what he really means is all history is about the oppressed and the oppressor. This is really important because people tend to take this idea in the coming years after Marx and run with it. So it becomes fundamental in some understandings of feminism, eventually postmodernism, post-structuralism, and much of the contentions we see today, where people are making YouTube videos about this and that, and where they stand on, transgender or whatever, stems out of this idea of the oppressed in society. In fact, it becomes the identifying mark of, minorities. I mean, aside from race, but that's what they're saying. They're oppressed because of their race. Anyways, now this shapes pretty much the whole of history. In fact, we have some histories that you can't talk about these things unless you talk about them in this category of like an oppressed group. And usually the big villains of history are white males. In fact, most of my professors that are teaching me this stuff are white males. So, but Marxism, you have to understand, is really in this field of academics. It's an ideology that exists really among the intellectuals of society. So if you look at like historically Cuba and their kind of revolutions in order to bring communism into Cuba, they were all sitting there in the universities having these conversations, having these dialogues about society and capitalism and this kind of oppression that's happening in society. And what they really need to do is they need a revolution. They need to change things. And then they realized, and so they went to the factories and told everybody, hey, we got to do this. They weren't interested. They were happy doing what they're doing. And it was those in the university that realized that this was kind of takeover was never going to happen, because the working class just wasn't interested. They ended up graduating from the universities or leaving the universities and going to work in the factories and become, the working class, so that they can, gather up these rallying cries and inspire a revolution. And that's usually how it's gone. In fact, if you want to read somebody's work that's, I think, pretty interesting on Marxism, check out Alvin W. Gouldner, that's what it was. Gouldner. Goulder. Anyways, he's a sociologist, and he kind of does a critique of Marxism from Marxism, and he really kind of looks at Marx's work. I think the guy's still a bit of a Marxist. He's just critiquing it to try and better it. So maybe he's in that neo-Marxist camp. I don't know. So this is Marxism, and we have to understand that this becomes the framework which historians begin to do their history. In fact, it's really this system that grows out into these histories of minorities, and what we begin to deem the histories from below. We eventually see a huge change within how people do history, coming out of the 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. So, the question, I think, is all history the history of class struggle? Is all history about class oppression? Is it about, this wrestling between two people? Now, my 2 cents is that's not the world that I live in. I haven't experienced that for myself. And I've worked just about every job under the sun, and I've quit quite a few of them. But largely because I'm like, I can't believe people pay people to do this. Is there other histories? I think so. And we'll get into them at another point. So thank you for watching. If you like this video, I really appreciate you to engage. You do all that subscribe, hit the bell stuff. But I would like you to engage. I like to see your comments. I would like to be able to respond to you and get to know where you are in this kind of idea of history. What you think might be some of the methods we should use, as well as some things that you would be interested in hearing somebody's perspective on. So with that, I thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you next time.